Superman is the earliest and most iconic superhero of all time, so of course he has a fair amount of history on both the big and small screen. An iceberg chart, for the uninformed, is a template to use to talk about a certain topic, with the entries on the top being the most well-known and the lower down getting more obscure. But now, with the context out of the way, it's time to get into the Superman movies and TV iceberg. Just note, this is a bit of an older iceberg, so unfortunately, David Cornsweet's Superman is mostly not present in this iceberg. Credit to u/420 Santi on r/Superman for making this. Layer 1. Super Mustache. This is a reference to the poor CGI cover-up used on Henry Cavill's lip during his appearance as Superman in the Justice League. It was, and still is, pretty controversial, much like the entire film that it was featured in. Shazam headless cameo. In Shazam, Superman makes a cameo, but his face is off screen. It is supposed to be Henry Cavill's Superman, if you couldn't tell, because it's in the same universe as Man of Steel and stuff. Black Adam post-credits scene. Once again, another Henry Cavill related entry, this time being his cameo in the post-credits scene of Black Adam, setting up a battle between the characters that never came to be. Man of Steel 2. There was a planned sequel to Man of Steel, which was announced, but officially cancelled after the failure of the DCEU. Superman Legacy. This is the only David Cornsweet related entry on this iceberg, with Superman Legacy being the original title for Superman 2025. Fleischer cartoons. The Fleischer Superman cartoons are very early animated adaptations of Superman being almost as key to his character as the comics were back then. Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld is known to be a pretty big fan of Superman, and he's referenced it in some of his creations, such as his own show. Brainwashed by Darkseid. In Superman the Animated Series, the episode Legacy depicts Darkseid brainwashing Superman into believing he was raised by him on Apokolips. Superman Lives. Superman Lives was a cancelled Superman film that was to be part of Tim Burton's Batman universe starring Nicolas Cage, but due to a disastrous production, the film never made it past the scripting and screen test phase. Layer 2. I Am Legend Easter egg. In the 2007 version of I Am Legend, while the main character is in New York, in the background, a billboard strangely resembling the Batman vs. Superman logo is visible. But this does make sense, since DC was trying to get Batman and Superman on the big screen for a long time, and a logo similar to this was used for a few comic runs before the movie. Batman vs. Superman cancelled movie. A version of Batman vs. Superman was planned for release in the early 2000s, but it was cancelled. But the idea of Batman vs. Superman was later used for the 2016 version. Superman Flyby. This was another cancelled movie slated for the 2000s, which was made to be a reboot, but it seems it was eventually turned into Superman Returns. Fun fact, this was the first Superman movie both Henry Cavill and Brandon Routh auditioned for. The Iron Giant. Superman is referenced in The Iron Giant in a few iconic scenes, and these scenes are pretty iconic, I have to say. I don't really know what else to say. They've been turned into merch and skins in the game Multiversus, if anyone even cares about that game. My Adventures with Superman. My Adventures with Superman is one of the recent Superman animated series and is generally well received. Despite the name and it being an animated series, it is an adult series. The CW Crisis on Infinite Earths. In the CW Crisis on Infinite Earths event, there are 3 Superman actors present. The 2 actors who played Superman on the CW and Brandon Routh, who played Superman in Superman Returns. Smallville Superman is a Superman who gave up his powers. Superman and Lois Superman is just the Superman from that show. And Brandon Routh plays a version of Superman inspired by Alex Ross's Kingdom Come. Ben Affleck Superman. Before becoming Batman, Ben Affleck played George Reeves in Hollywood Woodland, and in that movie, the George Reeves played by Ben Affleck plays Superman, so that means Ben Affleck played Superman. Supergirl, 1984, and DCEU canceled movie. Supergirl 1984 was a poorly received movie set in the Superman Donnerverse, and I couldn't find anything about a Supergirl DCEU film, so I'm not sure what that's referring to. The Adventures of Superman. The Adventures of Superman was a TV series starring George Reeves as Superman, and was one of the earliest versions of Superman to be in live action. The first season was in black and white, while the subsequent ones were in color. Layer 3. House of El symbol. The House of El symbol is said to represent hope and is the most iconic part of Superman's design. This could use more context for being particularly on Superman shows and the movies Iceberg. Steel. Steel was a superhero movie starring Shaquille O'Neal as the titular hero, Steel, who was one of the successors to Superman after his death. But the film was poorly received, forgotten, and didn't even have a mention of Superman. DC Nation shorts. DC Nation shorts were shorts made by various artists that aired in between shows on Cartoon Network, with many of the shorts of course featuring Superman, but the main one based on Superman was a short called Superman of Tokyo. Krypto the Superdog. Krypto is Superman's dog with similar powers to him. Once again, this could use some more context. Justice League Mortal. Justice League Mortal was a cancelled Justice League movie to be directed by George Miller, with the DJ Controna being planned to play Superman in the film. The film started production in 2007, but was of course cancelled. Muhammad Ali almost played Superman. For the 1978 film, Muhammad Ali was considered to play Superman, but we of course ended up getting Christopher Reeve's portrayal. But Muhammad Ali would have been an interesting choice to play Superman, especially since Superman vs. Muhammad Ali would have come out in the same year as the movie. Radio show. Around the time of the Fleischer shorts, a radio show was being made with the same voice actors. This is actually where Superman's flight ability came from, since before this, his ability was to jump super high like the Hulk. Jack Nicholson almost played Lex Luthor. Much like Muhammad Ali as Superman, Jack Nicholson almost played Lex Luthor in the Superman movie from 1978. But he of course played another key DC villain, that being the Joker in 1989's Batman. And I feel like he makes a better Joker rather than a Luthor, to be honest. President Luthor. I believe this is a reference to how Lex Luthor became the president in Smallville, but Lex Luthor becoming president is a comic storyline, so it would be nice to have some more context here. The Superman Curse. The Superman Curse is apparently a curse that involves Superman actors suffering from misfortune, but this is of course a silly little internet supernatural superstition thing, because like the actors chosen to demonstrate it are from isolated coincidences. Actors like Brandon Routh have not had any tragedies tied to them so far. Layer 4. Jack Kirby and Stan Lee in Superman the Animated Series. In the Superman the Animated Series episode, Apocalypse Now, Part 2, at the funeral scene, a background character modeled after Stan Lee appears, and the character, Dan Turpin, was modeled after Jack Kirby. Superboy 80s show. Superboy was a show that ran from 1988 to 1992 about supposedly the Christopher Reeve version of Superman and his adventures as Superboy. Of course, Reeve didn't appear, and the actor for Superboy was Jared Christopher. Justice League and Superman the Animated Series. While there was originally a different lineup for the Justice League in the Animated Series, Hal Jordan replacing Jon Stewart, Aquaman replacing Hawkgirl, and Barry Allen seemingly replacing Wally West, this lineup didn't seem to appear in any episode of Superman the Animated Series, but the most they did was build up to the Justice League with episodes featuring Barry Allen and the Batman among others. Superman the Animated Series original 40s look. Superman the Animated Series originally had to look much closer to a 1940s style, much like the look of the Fleischer cartoon. Cancelled Super Family cartoon. There was a cancelled animated series with Lois Lane, Superman, Krypto, and John Kent as the main roles, and there was also appearances from Damian Wayne in the series. There isn't much info on this cancelled show, since it never came out, and we didn't get much info on it after its cancellation, so I can't really say much about it. The Wedding. Superman has been married a few times in the TV series, like in The Adventures of Superman, Smallville, and Lois and Clark. Kill Bill speech. In the movie Kill Bill Volume 2, the character Bill gives a little speech about how Clark Kent is basically Superman mocking humans, which is wrong, but I think this is intentional because the character is a psychopath, and that's probably about how a psychopath would see Superman. Krypton. Once again, this could be more specific, and it's weird how low this is. Everyone knows that Superman is from Krypton at this point. This could be a reference to the sci-fi show of the same name, but I'm unsure. Krypton could describe so many things. Krypton is the name of a real element as well, for crying out loud. Legions of Superheroes canceled third season. The third season was planned for Legion of Superheroes, which was a late 2000s animated series about the Legion of Superheroes, a superhero team from the 30th century who recruited Superman from the past when he was young. The version of Superman in this is more like Superboy, but he is always referred to Superman as the show. Layer 5. Metallo in Batman vs. Superman. Wallace Keith's character from Batman vs. Superman was originally supposed to be Metallo, the android made by Lex Luthor, who has a kryptonite heart. Some of these concept designs were definitely better than others, but of course this never made it into the film. Smallville Season 11. Smallville Season 11 was a comic continuation of the CW show Smallville, where we actually get to see Clark Kent fully as Superman, alongside some other characters who appeared in the show and ones who didn't as well. Solo Luthor movie. In the DCEU, there was a Lex Luthor solo movie in the works, but it was of course scrapped, and probably for the better, since we all know Jesse Eisenberg wasn't the best version of Lex Luthor. Superman musical. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman was a musical that had a stage and TV version. It started in 1966 on Broadway and came to TV in 1975. It seems very campy and seems like it would fit right in with the 1966 Batman as well. Filmation Superman. This is likely referring to the 1966 to 1970 animated series The New Adventures of Superman, which had short episodes, usually around 6 minutes, and had 68 episodes over 4 seasons. Commercials. There are many Superman commercials, so again, this could be more specific, and it's weird how it's low. I mean, I'm sure You've seen a commercial with Superman in it at one point. Superman 5 Reborn. Superman 5 Reborn was going to be the 5th Superman movie starring Christopher Reeve and would have been about the death of Superman with Brainiac as the main villain. This movie was scrapped after the abysmal reception and box office of Superman 4 The Quest for Peace, and at that point, Christopher Reeve would have been playing the same character for over a decade. Batman and Robin Easter egg. I believe this is referring to Batman saying, "This is why Superman works alone," and Batman and Robin implying some version of Superman exists in this world, and possibly that him and Batman know each other. Superman Returns sequel. There were plans for a Superman Returns sequel called The Man of Steel, which eventually evolved into Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, mainly due to the poor reception and box office of Superman Returns. Superman 78. Superman 78 is a comic book continuation of the Donner Superman films, much like how Batman 89 was a continuation of the Burton Batman films, with Brainiac as the main villain of the series, taking elements from the cancelled Superman 5, which we spoke about earlier. Layer 6. Brainiac in Superman 3. Brainiac was originally meant to be the villain of Superman 3, but was replaced by Vera Webster. Honestly, Brainiac would have been a much more interesting villain than what we got in the film. J.J. Abrams and Ta-Nehisi Coates movie. J.J. Abrams and Ta-Nehisi Coates were making a Val Zod Superman film, but production on it slowed down until it was cancelled, which is too bad because I'd love to see a Val Zod Elseworlds Superman movie. Smallville Supernatural crossover. Supernatural writer Jackson Stewart pitched a crossover between Supernatural and Smallville, where the Winchester brothers would save Tom Welling from the Superman curse. Michael B. Jordan HBO series. Michael B. Jordan was planning another Val Zod relating project that has been shelved, that had his production company Outlier Society involved, but it was unrelated to the J.J. Abrams project, despite being developed around the same time. Bruce Wayne and Lois Lane. The original plans for Zack Snyder's DCEU involved Bruce Wayne dating Lois Lane after the death of Superman, which would have been an interesting dynamic. Ruby Spears cartoon. In 1988, a Superman animated series created by the studio Ruby Spears was created that had a relatively short run. Super Rabbit. Super Rabbit is a Bugs Bunny cartoon, which basically is a parody of the Fleischer cartoons, I believe, and since both characters are owned by the same studio, it just makes sense now, and Super Rabbit has appeared in other Looney Tunes shows, games, movies, and even merch. Mario Puzo's Superman script. Mario Puzo wrote the original scripts for Superman 1 and 2 in 1975. If his name sounds familiar, it's because Puzo wrote a lot of Mafia-related novels, including The Godfather, which became the inspiration for the movie of the same name. Layer 7. Justice Society World War II Orphanage Origin. Justice Society World War II is an animated movie about the Flash traveling back in time and meeting the Justice Society in World War II. Superman actually appears in this movie, and we get a non-traditional origin story for him. Ma and Pa Kent died in an accident when he was 3 in this universe, and he was sent to an orphanage. Gendy Tartakovsky cancelled shorts. Gendy Tartakovsky is one of the most legendary animators of our time, and he did a lot of work on Cartoon Network like The Clone Wars, Samurai Jack, and Dexter's Lab, so it makes sense that he almost worked with one of Warner Bros. Most popular characters, Superman, but it never came to be, which is unfortunate. I think he would have killed it with Superman. Lobo cancelled spin-offs. With Lobo coming up and the Supergirl movie, I think it's a good time to talk about the Lobo movie that was stuck in development hell. A Lobo movie was originally planned for 2009 and canceled in 2023, which would have cost $200 million, and it seems like it would have been a crazy movie. Batman in Smallville. Batman never made a full appearance in Smallville since there was some sort of contract due to the Nolan films, but he was alluded to in multiple scenes and featured in the Smallville follow-up comics since they didn't have the limitations they had on the CW. Matthew Vaughn and Mark Millar trilogy pitch. Around 2008, Matthew Vaughn and Mark Millar came up with a pitch for a Superman trilogy with a tone similar to the 70s and 80s movies starring Christopher Reeve, but they were turned down in favor of Man of Steel. In this series, Krypton would have actually existed while Superman was growing up on Earth, and the villains would have been Lex Luthor, General Zod, and Brainiac. Action Comics #1 in The Simpsons. In The Simpsons, Action Comics #1 is referenced a few times, like when Krusty uses a copy to light his cigar, with the joke being Krusty's rich, and one at a flea market where Homer is looking through a bunch of really expensive things for only 5 cents and calling them trash. Final layer, Layer 8. Super Friends, Death of Superman. There is a 1985 episode of Super Friends titled The Death of Superman, where Superman suffers kryptonite poisoning and dies. Of course he comes back, but this is dark for an episode of the Super Friends of all shows, and it predates the Death of Superman comic from 1992. Of course, the death and return in these stories are different, but it's still weird. There were 2 stories about the death and return of Superman with the same exact titles. Turkish Superman movie, Superman Donyosh. The Return in Superman is English. It is a 1978 low-budget ripoff of 1978 Superman the Loop movie, lifting elements from both that and the 1941 Captain Marvel serial. If you don't know, Captain Marvel is referring to Shazam, not the recent, arguably inferior Marvel character. She Six Sailors is a Popeye cartoon from 1944 where Bluto, Popeye's rival, dresses up as Superman to impress Olive Oil, who is a fan of Superman. So Popeye eats his spinach and gets superpowers like usual. It's interesting seeing how big Superman was that even early on, the popular cartoons were already spoofing it. The Brady Kids. In a 1972 episode of the Brady Bunch animated spin-off, The Brady Kids, Cindy's super friend, Superman appears as a guest star for the episode, which is interesting to see, I guess, even though I haven't watched this show nor the original Brady Bunch. Filipino Supergirl movie. Supergirl is an unofficial Filipino movie about, well, Supergirl. It's in black and white and seems pretty weird, and instead of being Kryptonian, she gets her powers from a ring. She fights a kaiju, mad scientist, and zombies, so yeah, pretty wild. Super Pup. The Adventures of Super Pup was a bizarre pilot episode for a 1958 TV show where instead of humans, Metropolis is populated by anthropomorphic dogs, played by actors with weird mascot heads on. If this ever got off the ground, it would be very odd to say the least. The Adventures of Superboy. The Adventures of Superboy was an animated series that ran from 1966 to 1969 about the adventures of Superboy, of course, the much younger version of Superman, where Clark Kent avoids school to save the day, which is pretty much what you'd expect from a Superboy cartoon. Smallville, the animated series. There is an animated Smallville revival in the works, so with many of the original cast and crew on board, but there hasn't been a lot of news on it recently. Whether that's good or bad news depends on how much you like Smallville and the CW. Superman and Sesame Street. Sesame Street has had a few appearances of Superman, with the most direct of these references being an animated short where Superman educates children on words that begin with the letter S. live action Red Sun movie. From what I found online, Matthew Vaughn has expressed interest in making a live action Superman Red Sun movie starring Henry Cavill for an Elseworlds film, but it's just an idea and no official progress has ever been made since this was stated. That was the Superman movie and TV Iceberg. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned something today. See ya.